Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Ash, and this is part 2 of the chess basics. Alright, so let's get into the video. First, I will show you the table of contents. This is what we are going to study today. Chapter 1, Chess Basics, the Fundamentals. Capturing the opponent's pieces, protection, check, checkmate, stalemate, castling, en passant, and then chapter 2 is advanced topics, a pin, a fork, a skewer, double checks, discovered attacks, ratings, and the 20-40-40 rule. Alright. The first topic is capturing the opponent's pieces. First is the king. The king can capture a piece in all directions, but only if that piece is one square away from the king, since kings can only move one square. However, it cannot take one of the opponent's pieces, which is protected by another. As you can see in this image, the pieces which are highlighted in red are the pieces the king can capture. The pieces that are not highlighted, however, those are pieces that the king cannot capture. For example, this knight. This knight is defended by this rook, and this bishop is defended by this pawn. Goes for the pawn, but this pawn is defended by all the pieces: the bishop, the rook, the knight, and the other knight. Also, the king cannot move in these two squares, since both of these squares are defended. However, the king can move to this green highlighted square, since that square is undefended. The best move would be to take the rook for free, since the rooks have a higher piece value than the knights. And you would rather take a piece than go to an empty square, right? Anyways, next is the queen. The queen can capture a piece if that piece is diagonally, horizontally, and vertically stared by the queen. Then the queen can take that piece. In this image, this is the white queen. This is the black knight. The queen can simply capture this knight. And I've also drawn this X, which marks the square that the queen cannot go to, since queens cannot jump over pieces. Next is the rook. Rooks can capture horizontally or vertically however many squares the piece is away from the rook. As you can see in this image, there are two things that the rook can capture: this pawn and this bishop, not the other pawn, since this is the white pawn and this is the white rook. You cannot capture your own pieces. The squares that the rook cannot move to are highlighted in red. It cannot move to this square, or any of these squares, or even this square, since the rook cannot jump over pieces. Next is the bishop. Bishops can capture any piece which is diagonally stared at by the bishop. Since there are light squares and dark squares on the chessboard, there are two types of bishops: the dark squared bishop and the light squared bishop. You can see in this image, this bishop can take this pawn. Both of these bishops are the dark squared bishops. Next is the knight. Knights can capture any piece which is in an L shape away from the knight. These pieces are the only ones that can jump over other pieces. As you can see in this image, this knight can capture this pawn, which is in an L shape away from the knight. You can count it up by either 2 squares up and 1 square to the right, or 1 square to the right and 2 squares up. It jumps over this black pawn and our white pawn. Lastly, the pawn. The pawns can capture any piece which is 1 square diagonally away from the pawn. However, it cannot take another piece that is right in front of the pawn. In this image, I've shown you that this white pawn can take this black pawn. But this white pawn cannot take this black pawn because pawns cannot capture pieces that are right in front of them. And by the way, this pawn cannot move anywhere if it couldn't capture this pawn. It would just be blocked forever. Next topic is protection. When we talk about protection of a piece, it usually means that there is a threat from one of the opponent's pieces to take our piece. So we have to either block the threat with another piece, defend that with another piece, or even just move that piece away to where there will be no threats. If we defend the piece and the opponent's piece takes our piece, it can be recaptured with a piece that was supposed to be defending our captured piece. However, you should only protect a piece if the opponent's piece has either the same or greater piece value. The king should always be protected from a dangerous attack, or the king can simply move out of the way if it is a check. Tip: if you want to see what the opponent is threatening to take, look for any moves which you would most likely play yourself, so that you don't fall into the traps set by the opponent. As you can see in this image, this king just moved from another square, which means that this king attacks our knight here. So we have to either move our rooks to e1, or from a5, move our bishop to c7, which defends the knight in a diagonal fashion. Or we could have just moved our rook to e1, which protected the knight in a horizontal line. Next topic is a check. The king cannot be captured. It can only be checked by any piece which is aiming at the king directly or checkmated. Will be discussed in the next section. Checks aren't that dangerous unless there will be no escape for the king. Some checks can simply be blocked, as an example with pawns or other pieces. However, that does not make all checks easy to handle. Checks can lead to checkmate as well. Checkmate means you or your opponent won the chess match. A king cannot check another king. In fact, there should be 1 square maximum between 2 kings. As you can see in this image, the bishop on b5 just moved from the square f1. And the bishop on b5 is apparently checking the king. So we could either move the king away, which is impossible since the king is blocked in by its own pieces. So the only way is to block the check. We could do it with the queen, the bishop, or the knight. The bishop and knight have the same piece value as the bishop. So, as an example, we could use the knight. Knight to c6, blocking the check. So if the bishop captures the knight, again checking the king, we could capture with our pawn on b7. And there will be no checks. Next is checkmate. Checkmate is when the opponent's pieces trap your king in a way that your king cannot move out of danger or take the threatening piece. If one's king is checkmated, the person who mated the king wins the chess match. A king can be checkmated by any other piece other than the king itself. Two kings cannot be next to each other. They have to stay 2 squares away from each other. Stalemate. Stalemate or draw is when you or your opponent's king cannot move to any square, since the king cannot walk into check, and there are no pieces that can move either. Stalemate or draw is when a player whose turn it is to move and his or her king is not in check or does not have any legal moves. In chess, material refers to the pieces on the chessboard. If so many pieces get captured that neither player has enough to mate the enemy king, the game is drawn due to insufficient material. Lastly, a stalemate is possible if the opponent has enough material to mate but does not have enough time to mate, so it will be considered a draw. Now you will only see this in online websites. You won't see this in any tournaments. In this first image, you can see that this white king just moved from this square to here. This black king does not have any legal moves. It could take either of the rooks, but that's not a legal move since the rooks protect each other and they guard the squares that the king can escape to. So it's a draw. And here, this is draw. Game drawn, timeout versus insufficient material. Lastly, this is just insufficient material. A king and a knight cannot checkmate a king. So this game is a draw. Same goes with a bishop. However, you can checkmate with a bishop and a bishop and a knight and a knight. Also, you can checkmate with a bishop and a knight, but it is extremely difficult. Next topic is castling. In chess, you and your opponent have a king. The kings can only move 1 square at a time. However, there is a special move. This special move is possible only if your rook or king has not moved yet. This is called castling. Castling is when you move your king 2 squares and the rook goes a square beside the king. So it basically jumps over the king. Castling is also a beneficial move since it makes your king safer. This is only if you have moved the 3 pawns in front of your king, which can even lead to your opponent checking you. Lastly, you have to move the pieces which block the path of castling first, so that you have a chance to castle. As you can see in this first image, this king wants to castle. The king moves 2 squares, and the rook moves 2 squares also and jumps over the king. And this is how it looked like after you castle. And this is also a tip. Don't push pawns to where you are going to castle, or don't push pawns in front of your king unless necessary, and castle as soon as possible. En passant. In chess, there is a special move called en passant, which is a special pawn capture. This special pawn capture can only occur if the opponent moves their pawn 2 squares from its starting position and your pawn is 1 square to the left or right of the pawn. Then you take diagonally, even though the opponent's pawn isn't diagonally to your pawn. En passant only happens on the 5th rank for white and on the 4th rank for black. Also, you have to take an en passant immediately. Only take if it helps your position, not 2 moves after the opponent moved the pawn. So here in this image, this pawn can take en passant, and this pawn just moved. If it were like a move after, en passant wouldn't be a move. Next chapter is a pin. In chess, a pin is a tactic in which a defending piece cannot move while exposing a more valuable piece on its other side to capture by the attacking piece. In other words, a pin is when any of the opponent's pieces attacks a less valuable piece that sits in front of a more valuable piece. Here, as it is shown, this bishop just moved from somewhere, attacks the knight. If the knight moves, the bishop could take the queen. So this pawn pushes it out and it moves back, but it is still maintaining the pin. Next is a fork. In chess, when you attack 2 or more pieces at the same time with one of your pieces, it is called a fork. A fork is referred to best with a knight, since the piece which creates a threat of taking 2 or more pieces at the same time more commonly is usually the knight, but can be any other piece. As an example, the bishop or even a pawn. In this image below, you can see that this knight will have to move to this green highlighted square to fork the rook and the king. Now this is a check, since the knight aims at the king, which is in an L shape away from the knight, so it is a check. The king has to move, because there is no other way to capture the knight or to block it. When you cannot capture a knight and the knight is checking your king, there is always no way to block the attack, since knights can jump over pieces. After the knight moves to this square, this endgame will be winning. A skewer. A skewer is the exact opposite of a pin. The more valuable piece sits in front, and behind it is a less valuable piece, but still a piece that could make a difference in the match, or at least give you or your opponent an advantage. As an example in this image, this bishop just moved from this square and is attacking first the queen. The queen cannot take the bishop since the bishop is protected by the knight and the other queen. After the queen moves, the bishop can take the rook, which has a higher piece value. So it gives black an advantage. Next is double checks. A double check is when you move any piece which checks or aims at the opponent's king, but that piece used to hide another piece, which when opened also checks the opponent's king. Therefore, it is called a double check. Double checks are powerful, rare, and hard to find. Usually, double checks lead to an advantage in material or even to a simple checkmate. As you can see in this first image, white sacrificed his or her queen by moving it to d8. The king has to take. There is no other legal moves. After the king takes the queen, this bishop will move to g5, checking the king and also opening up the rook, which also checks. Now the king has two options. It can move to c7, which will lead to bishop d8, checkmate. Or the king can move to e8. This will lead to rook d8, checkmate, since there are no legal moves after either of these moves. And this is quite hard to find. Next topic is discovered attacks or checks. A discovered attack happens when one piece moves to reveal another, basically like a fork but within check. Discovered attacks are extremely powerful, but they are not common. As an example, a bishop moves out of the way, revealing our queen, which stares at the opponent's queen. But since the opponent is in check, he or she has to move his or her king, which means the queen is free material. So after we give the check with our bishop, the queen sees the opponent's queen. And you cannot really capture the bishop, so you have to move the king or block the check, which will lead to our queen capturing the opponent's queen, which is winning, since the queens have the highest piece value and they are the most powerful pieces on the chessboard. Last topic is ratings and the 20-40-40 rule. In chess, there are ELO ratings. These ratings can get from 100 to about 3,500 points. If you are anywhere below 1,000, this means that you are a newbie at chess. If you are below 1,500, this means that you are an average chess player. If you are above 1,500, this means that you are an intermediate player. If you are 1,900 or above, this means that you are an advanced player. If you are in the range of 3,000 to 3,500, this means that you are insane. Whenever you lose a chess game, you lose rating points. Likewise, if you win a chess game, you gain rating points. If, this is for the 20-40-40 rule. Anyways, if you are below the rating of 2000, you should focus 20% of your time studying openings, 40% of your time studying middle games, and 40% of your time studying end games. Extra facts. And this is about the ratings of titled players. First is the Candidate Master, CM, has a rating of about 2,100. Next is a National Master, or NM, has a rating of about 2,250. A FIDE Master, or FM, has a rating of about 2,300 to 2,400. An International Master, or IM, is awarded for IM norms. An IM can have any rating which is above 2,400. A Grandmaster, or GM, is the highest title a player can receive and is only received from GM norms. Can have a rating of about 2,500 or above. Norms will be discussed in future videos with more detail. Alright guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share these videos with your friends so that they can learn about the chess basics. Also, in the comment section below, rate this video out of 10 with suggestions so the content improves. See you in the